We can come in and we can do a workshop and teach people about how to protect their well-being. But if the leaders are still creating a toxic work environment where work hazards are allowed to continue and fester, then you're never going to have that kind of psychological health and safety that you really need in an organization to promote well-being in the long run.
Welcome to What's Possible, where leadership thrives. I'm Eileen Schaefer, and I'm glad you're here. Behind every powerhouse communicator and relationship builder is a strategic thinker who leads with curiosity. Because of that, we believe that your journey to becoming the best leader starts with you. Imagine a workplace where everyone feels safe to speak up, comfortable to contribute, and encouraged to innovate. That is psychological safety. I know it's a little easier said than done, yet we know it's possible, and that kind of culture breeds greater creativity, well-being, collaboration, and so much more. Today, I'm joined by experts Louisa, Jewell, and Shannon, who will unpack the critical role of leadership in creating a nurturing and psychologically safe environment. We'll learn actionable steps from effective listening to encouraging participation to establish a culture where vulnerability is viewed as a strength and every team member is empowered to thrive. Let's find out what's possible when we build an organization where everyone feels safe to learn, contribute, and to challenge the status quo. Welcome, Louisa, Jewell, and Shannon, I am glad to have both of you join me.
Thrilled to be here. I feel like I'm with the dream team tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here.
The feelings are mutual. So just a quick background, what we're going to talk about, then we're going to dive into intros. And for our listeners' benefit, Louisa, Shannon, and I started chatting, and all of a sudden I realized I need to be rolling this because Louisa was bringing up this great stuff. I'm like, stop talking. We need to get this on. We need to get it recorded for our audience. And Shannon said, well, I have something to add. I'm like, no, you can't add anything until our audience gets to listen
now
in.
I don't feel psychologically safe because you're Just kidding.
You're safe. You're safe here, Shannon.
Thank you.
You are safe here. And I just want to preserve your words of wisdom so our audience doesn't miss out on all the good stuff that you have to share. So before we jump in, the reason we are talking about the psychological safety today is we had an HR partner event, and one of our HR partners said, hey, I'm most curious about psychological safety, and it is an issue. It's something that we talk about, but doing it is very different. And how do we bring it into our organization in a way that it's working and that it has the intended result where people do feel psychologically safe? And what happens when we see that occurring in organizations? What is the upside? So that's our teaser. But before we get there, Louisa, I'm going to jump to you. And if you can please share with our audience, and I'm going to ask you to do an intro like I just did. I recorded with Neil Scott, one of our colleagues, earlier today. And he did an intro where he could not say what his academic background was, his professional experience, anything that you could find on LinkedIn. So I want you to share some good stuff about Louisa that you're not going to find on LinkedIn.
Oh, that's hard. I don't know what to say. I think what you won't find on LinkedIn is that I'm Sicilian. So I have this rich Italian background and this really great Italian family. And I think that contributes to my psychological safety in many ways. So yeah, I guess that's one thing you will not find on my LinkedIn profile.
I love it. And now if you were to sum up your LinkedIn profile, what is the most important thing on there that people know about you?
Well, I think what I primarily do is I work with organizations to create positive work environments where we can protect psychological safety and where people can really thrive and flourish. So I run many programs doing that. And a lot of it has to do with leadership development, because I really think that psychological safety starts at the leadership level.
Yeah. Excellent. And one thing you did not bring up is you have a book on confidence too. And to be a confident leader, you also need that psychologically safe environment to show up more confidently too. So
yeah, I think you do. I think it makes you more confident as well when you know that you can present authentically in your organization, have the confidence to do that, and to know that you will be accepted and that you belong. And even if you make mistakes, it's okay. So I think confidence does play a role in that.
Excellent. Thank you, Louisa. And now, Shannon, you got a head start on the question. What will we not find on your LinkedIn?
What you will not find on my LinkedIn is that my ancestors on one side are from Ireland, but I recently found out on Ancestry.com is that my father's side is like from Germany. There's someone from Scandinavia, and they came over in like the 1600s. So who knew? And I find psychological safety in my family and my kiddos. And you will not see my dog on LinkedIn, although I would like to create posts about my dog. I think Eileen is getting them a little obsessed with my dog, but he definitely creates well-being and play. And I think those are, since Louisa did such a good job of threading the needle, I think those are a key part of psychological safety too. So
I love it. And we might suggest that leaders bring their dog to work. I don't know if we're going to go that deep, but we might. So,
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if there's research about companies where you can bring your dog, if there is more social and emotional intelligence and psychological safety. That would be a good study.
This is true.
I think there is, because I used to work in an environment where I could bring my dog. And before I went without my dog, no one would come and talk to me. And then when I had my dog, everyone was coming to talk to the dog. But of course, then they'd say, oh, I guess I should acknowledge the human as well next to the dog.
See?
It really improved my social interactivity with the dog. It made a difference.
Interesting. I guess it would not create psychological safety for someone who has a fear or allergy or anything like that. But for those who love dogs,
hypoallergenic dogs, okay? I mean,
my dog was hypoallergenic. Yes,
they've been trained. But you're right.
This is true.
Yes.
So, what I am going to share about Shannon that you might get from her LinkedIn is when we have leaders come to us looking for greater, I'm going to say influential leadership. We used to call it, or we still call it, executive presence. But then it's like, what defines executive presence? And we're not doing a whole podcast on defining executive presence. So for leaders who want to have more influential leadership and be able to present in ways, going back to Louisa, more confidently. And so that is one of Shannon's many expertises that she brings. And then also she is a co-author of a book on strengths. So we have some good wisdom in the room right now. So let's dive on in to psychological safety. But before we do, what is psychological safety? So Louisa, I'm going to have you start with your definition, and then we'll hop back to Shannon.
Well, I kind of see psychological safety with two different perspectives. So there is one perspective out of Harvard where they talk about psychological safety as creating a work environment where it's okay for you to make mistakes, that you will not be ridiculed, that you will not be demoted, that it's not going to have a negative impact on you if you make a mistake or if you don't do things perfectly. And that kind of psychological safety is really great for innovation, because as people try new things or take risks, they want to know that they're in an environment where it's going to be okay if they fail. So that's one perspective on psychological safety. Then I'm Canadian, so I'm here in Toronto, and we have in Canada the Psychological Health and Safety Standard. Now, that's a different perspective if you're familiar with workplace health and safety, which is, do I have a safe environment? I'm not going to have walls falling over me, or I'm not going to fall in holes or things like that, or get sucked into the dough making machine or something. So that's really important. And that's mandatory here. And I would presume it's mandatory in the US as well, as we protect people from those hazards. But Canada, in the last, number of years, it's been all over 13 years now, we've implemented the psychological health and safety standard, in which, and that's not mandatory, it's optional for leaders to implement. But what it does is it identifies 13 different areas that create psychological safety to the point where you are not causing people psychological harm in your workplace. And so those are the two different perspectives that I look at.
Yeah. Shannon, would you like to add on to that? Thank you, Louisa.
Yeah. So I'd like to add on to the first definition. So there's two main schools of thought, at least in the US, on this. There's the Amy Edmondson, the Harvard approach of psychological safety. And then I've had some clients who are interested in Timothy Clark's approach, and he has 4 aspects of psychological safety. The first is inclusion safety. So just by virtue of being human, you are included, and this connection sort of supersedes any differences. Then the next stage he has as learner safety, which I would liken to what Louisa defined, which is you feel safe even when, not if, but when you make mistakes, and you can learn and be part of the team. The third is contributor safety. So you get to do what you're good at. You get to use your strengths. You might be denied contributor safety if you have a boss who is maybe jealous or arrogant or, aloof or, lacks empathy, perhaps. And then the fourth stage is challenger safety. So can you push back against the status quo if you disagree with something that's happening? Can you be, the person who raises the flag if you see something that's not going well? So those are the 4 categories, and there are different ways that you can achieve each of those 4 things. So it's very similar to Louisa's first definition, but just a little different there.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing that in. And I love having those 4 categories, because we might feel like, oh, I hit on 1 or 2, but then and I'm curious what you think. I have we've got inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger. Which one do you think, just based on your clients, would you say is sometimes the one that gets either forgotten or is hardest for people?
That's a good question. Forgotten or hardest? I think that for leaders, for new leaders, the challenger safety is difficult because sometimes they can feel like you're challenging their position. The thing about Timothy Clark's approach is that he puts learner safety ahead of contributor safety. And I don't know if I agree with that, because on the one hand, I feel like I have to be able to contribute before I'm able to learn and grow. But he had it in the reverse. So I think that is where people might, disagree. But I think the hardest part is really the learner and how do you make mistakes. So sometimes I'll go in, and I know we're going to get to ways to build this in a minute, but sometimes I'll use improv, and there's an exercise where it's called the I made a mistake exercise. And so we design it specifically so that you will make a mistake, but everyone in the circle has to applaud you uproariously for making the mistake. And then you have to go to a different circle where you're going to make another mistake. And it's interesting to see how some people will try to game the whole exercise so that they never make a mistake. And they've missed the whole point, because the whole point is to say, can I, throw my hands up in the air and bow like I've just, won a Tony Award and say, I made a mistake. So I think that's the hardest for employees is to really know, okay, it's going to happen. I am human, and I'm going to learn from it and move on.
Yeah. I love that exercise. That's so fun. I would imagine it lands in a bunch of laughter at the end.
Oh, yeah. Wild laughter all along the way. Yeah. And at first people were like, why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. But then we have a conversation about, so are you allowed to make a mistake? Is that acceptable? And of course, the leaders are like, well, yes, of course you can make mistakes as long as, it's not too big of a mistake, or, you fix it next time. And so you can see around the edges, they're not really open to making mistakes because it's difficult. We're worried about then, are they safe with their management who's going to, slap them on the wrist? So
true. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Louisa, on those four?
So interestingly, I was on a call. So I bring together leaders in HR, leaders who are working on well-being, promoting well-being in their organizations. And we were just on a call the other day, and they were talking about inclusion, this idea of inclusion. And I think a lot of organizations are now divesting in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's what we're finding here, that there seems to be very much a polarization. So they were very much concerned with the kind of climate that they're working in these days. And I think we're going to much more this idea of walk around leadership, this idea of just checking in with people to see how they're doing and to learn ways in which we can include people in conversation, in leadership, in perspectives, in voices. And that was very much what came up as a top topic for these people, for this group.
You probably remember this quote. It's Netflix VP of inclusion strategy, Verna Myers, famously said, "Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance."
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that diversity opens the door.
Yes.
Inclusion is, are you going to put your money where your mouth is? Inclusion, you're right, Louisa. It all starts from there. If people don't feel like they're included, whether it's not being on the email chain or not being in the meeting, you really can't go anywhere from there. And that's why Tim Clark's, method builds.
Yeah. And, years ago, I worked for a really, really big technology company. And what we were finding is because the men were going to play hockey, with several times a week or whatever, they were being more included in these conversations about who would be promoted next. And women, because they went home, I'm not saying this happens to everyone, but, many years ago when I worked there, most of the women were the ones who were going home early or at the end of the day to take care of the kids and take care of the household. And so they were not being included in those discussions. So I really love that whole piece that you were talking about, Shannon, that, inclusion means that you're being asked to dance. And are you being included in those conversations or those opportunities?
Yeah, that's such a good metaphor. The one person who we were hoping was going to be able to join us today and unfortunately was not able to is Vanessa Perry on our team. And she has worked in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion for decades at this point. Way, way long ago, she started her career in this space and is a thought leader in this. And one of the things that we offer that's specific coaching with Vanessa is working with senior leadership on how do you create an environment that embodies diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this invitation to dance from the leadership on up. But it's not just this one-off workshop on this topic, and then everyone goes back to their desks and gets swept into budgets and strategic planning in totally different areas. Instead, it's really working with senior leadership to create an environment that trickles down all the way and seeps into every part of the organization and addresses that inclusion. I really love that. The one that when I look at this, I do think Challenger is an interesting one because I think it creates an uncomfortable environment for the leader sometimes, but it also for the person who is the challenger. It's on both ends. So it's a really interesting, you need such a safe environment for both the manager and the directs to be able to challenge. And going back to your word invitation, an invitation from the manager to challenge, right?
I really do think it's important for leaders to ask for the challenge. because there's not a lot of people really who will stand up or challenge the leader, especially in group environments. We've seen also in certain cultures, it's really important that you do not challenge leadership. So these social norms can be very, very powerful for us. And so what I always encourage leaders to do, and I do this with my team as well, is I'll say, okay, I've heard all the great feedback on my idea. Thank you. Now we need to put a different hat on, and I need to hear all of the things that you think are wrong with everything I just said. And I really want to hear from everybody. And I'll actually go around the room, and if someone has not spoken, I'll say, I haven't heard from you. I really need to hear one thing that is really a bad idea about the idea I've just put forward. And it's so great because, and I think as a leader, you then have to accept the feedback. You can't get defensive about that, but be open-minded to it. And usually people are very professional and positive, like constructive with their feedback that they're giving you.
Oh, I really love that.
Shannon. I have to jump in since you are Sicilian. The Pope actually has this as part of his cadre. There is a person whose role in the Vatican is to be the devil's advocate. I kid you not. That person is supposed to point out what could go wrong. What are the risks and the problems? So.
Yeah, and see, I think that is fabulous. And I think there should be some sort of norm in a meeting to be able to do that, to say, here are the plus sides. Let's bring out the not so good sides or the negative sides as well. And, being negative in a constructive way is very powerful, just as being positive in a constructive way is very powerful.
See, and who says all positive psychology practitioners are Pollyanna? Look at us. We're talking about focusing on what could go wrong.
I am Sicilian, so, I gotta, it's my DNA pulls me there, right? So.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking kind of a fun exercise. I don't know, it might be too loud, but this would be an in-person, if the leader actually gives everybody a blown up balloon and one pin, and everybody has to poke one pin into their balloon, that, the balloon represents the leader's idea. And we're looking for each person to pop the balloon with something. And if we want to go back to positive psychology, it could be, okay, what do you see as some challenges here with what I brought up? And bring one solution one tweak that you might like better to this idea. So how do we take this idea as foundational and then just totally shift it around so that it actually works? And then that invites collaborative contribution.
I'm going to put a pin in that idea in case someone is PTSD and you're like triggering them with, 10 balloon pop. No, I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, but out of fairness, my daughter had always growing up a balloon. This would not work for her. So you have a very good point, Shannon. Popping balloons
would not work. It would not work. Yeah, for one of my daughters either. That would be she would run out of the room. No.
Same. Yeah, so okay, sorry Olivia, and sorry to Louisa's daughter.
But there's so much psychological safety on this podcast that I can poke a hole in what you've just said. That is the leadership that Eileen Schaefer provides. So there you go.
No, I think leadership is really, really critical to psychological safety. And I heard this great analogy the other day because I think we go in as positive psychology practitioners and we'll teach a workshop or we'll teach tools, or I might do a coaching program with leaders on how to create more positive workplaces. Or we might do a lot of workshops with people on stress reduction and resilience and, those other things to promote our well-being. And we kind of think about that as kind of like putting construction hats on on people, right? We're on a construction site. Let's put the construction hats on people so that they can take care of their own personal well-being. But are the leaders still walking around throwing bricks at people? And
Yeah.
I love that analogy because, we can come in and we can do a workshop and teach people about how to protect their well-being. But if the leaders are still creating a toxic work environment where work hazards are allowed to continue and fester, then you're never going to have that kind of psychological health and safety that you really need in an organization to promote well-being in the long run.
Yeah, you're right. It can't all be on the individual. Like, just fix yourself and you'll be fine. You're part of a system. So I agree with that.
And you both know the research. So just start ping-ponging back and forth the upside of creating a psychologically rich environment. What happens in an organization?
Well, the first one is the most famous team group study is Google's Project Aristotle. And they tried to look at everything that would make a high-performing team. They thought it was like, is it introverts or extroverts? Do people know each other, don't know each other? And what they found were the two things that helped promote psychological safety were conversational turn taking, so everybody gets a chance to contribute. And Louisa's mentioned this a lot tonight. There's a great example for how Saturday Night Live was created. Lorne Michaels makes everybody talk. And then the other one is higher than average social sensitivity, or basically empathy. And the benefit is both your psychological well-being, but also the team performance. So they actually assessed the performance of the teams were higher when they had those factors of higher psych safety.
Excellent.
So that's my ping. Do you have a pong?
Well, yes. Okay, I have a pong. So what we know too is that, and this is generally where we take a look at how much insurance benefits are costing certain corporations. So we'll take a look at the costs associated with long-term and short-term disability, and they are very related to the levels of psychological safety in organizations. So the higher the psychological health and safety, the lower those costs are for organizations. And insurance rates are skyrocketing because here in Canada, for example, the number one reason for long-term and short-term disability are now mental disorders. So it's become epidemic. It was epidemic before the pandemic. The pandemic made it worse. So that certainly is a benefit to the organization to have higher levels of psychological safety.
Not to mention reduced turnover. So if you feel safe, you're less likely to quit, which saves organizations a ton of money.
Increased innovation. If you feel safe, you're more creative and innovative.
Absolutely. More collaboration. You stop working, in silos. That's the thing I hear in lots of organizations. We're doing great work, but we're in a silo. We don't know what anyone else is doing. So that's a benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, we've also seen, I know this is related and not quite specific to psychological safety, but we see also higher rates of profitability, return on assets, as well as firm value are also associated with higher levels of well-being, which are, mediated by psychological safety as well.
So many really powerful reasons to have that type of environment. So now we have a listener who is listening and they're saying, this is all great, but what is the number one thing I can do to create a psychologically safe environment? Each of you.
Well, I will say that one of the number one things that you can do is, first of all, do an assessment of your team, your division, your organization to determine where the psychological hazards are. So there are different kinds of hazards: work design hazards, work condition hazards, social support hazards. And we can identify what those hazards are, and we can do certain surveys to determine where are we at risk for causing psychological harm in our organization. And then it's just a matter of putting a plan in place to address those particular issues. And sometimes it's a lot easier than you think. I worked with an organization, we did a hazards assessment, and we found that there was a particular job role that was being overworked. And so there were many complaints, and the job role was actually critical to the organization's success. And so once we identified that, the leaders actually just started to have what we call stay interviews with this role and people in this role, and just say, how are you doing? How are you feeling about your workload? And then they just started to have conversations about, well, do they know how to allocate their roles? Do they know how to delegate? Do they know what they're like? What is it? Is it a training issue? Is it a delegation issue? Is it actually a work design issue? And they just had these conversations, and we collected all of the information from the stay interviews. And then the leaders identified certain trends in what this particular role was talking about and what they were stating, and they were able to address them quite easily. So some people think it's a great big huge thing to have to implement. In fact, just having a conversation with people on how are you doing, how's work, that can be a very, very simple first thing that you can do to get started.
Excellent. And Shannon.
Yeah, since Louisa went more global on the assessments, I'm going to go more behavioral. And I think that listening is like driving. Everybody thinks they're above average, which is not statistically possible. I think most people are terrible at listening. We're all multitasking. I'm guilty of it as well. I think you need to, shut your email inbox off, shut off all your notifications, and just focus on one thing, and really listen with curiosity. Listen to understand, ask like twice as many open-ended questions as you think you need to before you come in with your idea. Because all of the people we coach, all the leaders are smart, they're experts, they're hired because they're experts. And if they got to be experts at listening, being truly present and really curious, I think the world would shift. That's really my mission.
Yeah.
How can we move the needle there?
Piggybacking on what you just said, Shannon, I think we don't want to assume that our environment is one way or another. You don't want to go in assuming that your environment is psychologically safe and everyone feels like they can challenge, they can, be a learner, a contributor. And you also don't want to assume you're failing in this area. But I think going back to asking questions and being curious, as Louisa said and Shannon said, is being curious and asking your teams and role modeling this and leading with vulnerability at times, leading with, I messed up and this is what I'm doing to, fix X, Y, or Z, so that people are able to see the full you and not feel that you're above everything else. So one final parting word for each of you in terms of what you hope is a big takeaway. So Shannon, I'm going to let you start because I've asked Louisa's the next one in the screen to me. So I keep going to Louisa, and it's always tough to be the second one when somebody before you says something awesome. So I'm going to let you be the first one this time.
I would say that if everyone took away the conversational turn taking of tracking it, be a little social scientist. Who's gotten to speak, who hasn't gotten to speak, who's talked for more time. Just do that in like one meeting a day. I think that is a great first step. And that's how you can start to build a habit. That's my takeaway.
Excellent. And Louisa.
My takeaway is don't throw bricks. And also know when you're throwing bricks and who's throwing the bricks and how that can change. And another really important takeaway is sometimes psychological safety is just really simple. Just listen, just ask and listen. And I think if you only do that, I think it would improve psychological safety, and then do something with the information when you are listening.
Yeah. And I'm going to add my final takeaway is have one-to-one conversations. Oftentimes we think of psychological safety as happening in a group. But if we can create psychological safety one person at a time when we come together as a group, it creates collective safety.
I think so. I think it gives people permission too to really be personal about what's going on with them as well. That's great.
Yeah. Thank you, Louisa and Shannon, for joining me on this conversation. I always love time with both of you.
Thank you, Eileen and Shannon. It was great to hang out with you guys tonight.
Thanks for having us.
This podcast is a catalyst for your leadership and well-being journey. To step deeper into exceptional leadership, visit svchange.com for personalized support that will take you to the next level. If you find this show meaningful, please hit that follow or subscribe button. It helps more people find what's possible organically. If you have questions about anything we've talked about, please drop me a line at podcast@svchange.com. I read every email I get, whether that's an episode idea, a guest recommendation, or just a simple note about how the show has impacted you. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Eileen Schaefer. Thanks for listening. What's Possible is produced by the team at Palm Tree Pod Co. The executive producer is Anthony Palmer. Thanks to Emily Miles and Caitlin Krings for video and digital support. The content for this podcast is created by Eileen Schaefer and the team at Silicon Valley Change.